I want to welcome everybody for coming this evening. I'm Kathy Jack, President of the Historical Society and Museum, and just wanted to remind everybody before we start in with this very interesting presentation tonight that our final presentation in our Spring Speaker Series will be in 2 weeks, and it will be Dan Delegati. He's a local resident who owns the local at McDonald's, is going to talk about the history of McDonald's, and specifically he'll also be mentioning that his grandfather, talking about his grandfather who actually invented the Big Mac. So, you know, it'd be an interesting presentation. So this evening, I am pleased to introduce Tim Bennett. Tim was born in Grove City and is a graduate of Grove City High School and Youngstown State University. He first became involved in Civil War living history after joining the Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War in 1972. And Tim has been a Civil War collector and a reenactor for over 45 years. So I'll turn it over to Tim. It's a long time.
When you hear it said like that. Good evening. I guess the title of the talk was Civil War Reenacting and General Maxwell. And it was Kay.
Hi, Kay. And sign in. Yeah.
We'll wait for Kay to come in. But anyways, my grandfather moved the Bennett family here in Grove City in 1915. Dad was born on McConnell Street in 1916, and so they moved from Indiana County. Hi, Kay.
Hello.
How are you? Where I received, I guess, my early Civil War history lesson was from my grandmother, Elsie Bennett. Her father was a Civil War veteran, and he had served with the Pennsylvania Regiment out of Indiana County. And she would tell me some stories about him, and that he had fought at Gettysburg and things like that, and that got my interest peaked at a young age. In 1963, Dad was working for SATEC, and he would travel the state, and he'd take me with him every once in a while during the summer. And that was my first visit to Gettysburg in 1963. I would have been about 11 years old. And looking back at it, that's when they first opened up the Wax Museum, 1963. So, and that was, I remember Dad taking me in there, and that was to see the wax figures in the pit, and then they'd flash those lights, and it looked like everybody was moving. It was for an 11-year-old. I was probably hooked at that time. As far as Grove City was concerned, I mean, like I said, we were born here, we were raised here. I never saw or heard much of Civil War history. It wasn't in my lifetime, and it wasn't a big emphasis in the town. We had a monument that was out at the park that had Civil War on it, with the beautiful eagle. I mean, it's a beautiful monument. And the other was up in Mercer. But I always thought, well, if you wanted to study the Civil War or hear anything about the Civil War, you had to go to Gettysburg. It wasn't here in Grove City. In 1971, but in 71 by that time I was in college, and Dad and I we would take our trips down to Gettysburg on weekends. And we happened to be down there on the same weekend as Remembrance Day, which is a big day for the Sons of Union Veterans organization. When it's the same day, or they try to get the same day that Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address. So there's parades and everything going on at that time. And that was my first introduction then to seeing somebody in a Civil War uniform. Again, this would have been in 1971, and I was amazed. I had never seen that before, and so I got interested in talking with these guys, and I ended up joining the Sons of Union Veterans, and then also the Sons of Veterans Reserve, which is the military arm of the Sons of Union Veterans. but it was out of Salem, Ohio. Again, it wasn't in Mercer County or in Grove City. And that's when I started my reenacting. I don't know if you want to call it a career, but that's when I started reenacting. And at first, reenacting was back then in the 70s. It wasn't as big as it has gotten. We would reenact inside race fields, race car fields. There'd be an infield area. We'd have reenactment there, or small parks. And if you got a couple thousand guys together, it was a pretty big deal. In 1973 was the 110th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and that was my first event at Gettysburg. And there was probably maybe 3,000 reenactors at that time, and that was quite a while ago. I stuck with reenacting. I graduated from college. I moved south and worked in the South for quite a few years, and I still reenacted with other units from down there. And we went through the 125th anniversary of the Civil War, and that generated a lot of interest in the Civil War. We started seeing, like when I was a kid, it was Red Badge of Courage with Audie Murphy. That was about our only movie, and then Gone with the Wind. That was the two Civil War movies. In the 80s, you started seeing TV miniseries, North South and Blue and Gray, and that was they used a lot of reenactors in those. We took part in some of those filming of those, and then when we came out with, of course, started getting some feature films. Glory was, I think, the big one, and the 125th anniversary. We would, at Gettysburg for the 125th, we had approximately 14,000 troops on the field with the same amount of artillery that was used during the battle. The final day of Pickett's charge, there was 7,000 Confederate troops came across this giant field, and the Union side we had 5,000 Union troops waiting. That was in 1988 for the 125th. So reenacting had grown, and the whole business had grown too. I mean, it's become quite expensive to get involved in everything. I moved back to Mercer County, and again, we didn't have any real Civil War, any organization that I was involved in or that was here to get involved in. Our reenacting group was out of Pittsburgh. That's where I would go to join up with them until 1989. And in 89, we decided to, in 1990, to start our own organization here in Mercer County. And the guys I knew that were up here, we had a few that were involved. We started out of the Mercer County Historical Society, the Western Pennsylvania Civil War Reenactors Society. And that started in 1994, and it's still active today. The guys have just had a meeting yesterday, and they're setting up for this year's events. But it was during 1990 that I started, when we decided to get this organization off the ground. I started doing some research, and I've been hearing things. And I heard about a brigadier general that was from Grove City. And I said, I never heard that before. I never heard of this fella. So getting into researching him, came up with a gentleman that was very well known in Grove City. He was probably the most distinguished citizen of Grove City when Grove City was first incorporated back in 1883. When he died in 1929, it was front page news. And he was one of the last of his Civil War veterans from Grove City that was still living. And that was Norman J. Maxwell. And he was kind of like the impetus where what we wanted to do when we didn't want to just start an organization, Civil War reenacting organization that just burned powder and showed, battle reenactments. We wanted to reintroduce the citizens to their local Civil War heritage. Heritage has been forgotten. Like I said, I'd grown up, never heard of it. Actually, Dad could barely remember. He thought, because he would have been in 29, Dad would have been around 12 years old. He could remember the parades, the Memorial Day parades, and a man rode a white horse, but he wasn't sure who that was. So we wanted to honor General Maxwell. But let me first give you an idea who exactly Norman Maxwell was. He was born in what was then Mercer County, but it was out at the old Maxwell farm in Plain Grove, which is Lawrence County now. Back in 1934, that was still part of Mercer County. So he was technically born in Mercer County in March of 1834. He learned as he grew, he learned the carriage business or the wagon making business in Mercer, and he started a business in North Liberty. He had a business there, and later on also in Mercer. In 1853, he married Elizabeth Campbell, who was the daughter of Benjamin Campbell out of Slippery Rock. And they had one daughter, and her name was Flora Maxwell. She married a Welch, and Flora's buried up here at the Greenwood Cemetery off by the Wolf Creek. Prior to the Civil War, I think a lot of these guys saw things were developing in a country that was going to turn bad, and they wanted to be in some ways prepared for a war. And I think we saw the same thing in World War II. We had early drafts, and guys who joined the National Guard to enlist to get the experience and try to get ready for the upcoming war. Well, these guys did the same thing down in Plain Grove and in our area here too, Grove City. They joined the militia groups, which met on a monthly basis. The Slippery Rock had one that they would drill. They would learn to fire their rifle muskets and just get ready. They're getting ready for what was coming. This militia group eventually became Company E of the 100th Pennsylvania Regiment. And the 100th Pennsylvania is one of the top 6 regiments in the war for casualties in a fighting regiment. They were nicknamed the Roundheads, and it's kind of when people hear that, and then again, the Roundheads, this is what they wanted to be known by, was given to them by General Scott when the man who formed the 100th Pennsylvania out of Newcastle, Colonel Leisure, when he met General Scott, Scott asked him, well, what are these men made of? And he said, well, mostly Scotch-Irish of the Western Pennsylvania. And he said, well, then they're good Roundheads. And that's where they got their nickname as the Roundheads from Scotland and the English wars. So that's what they were known as. And when they enlisted, what's interesting, right upon enlistment, well, we'll go through his record. He enlisted as a private, and the company was of 100 men. And in August of '61, they went to Harrisburg, where they were designated as the 100th Pennsylvania and formed up with the regimental colors. In September of '61, he was promoted to sergeant, and by October of '61, he was first lieutenant. So they saw his abilities pretty fast, and he was promoted. And I don't say promoted. A lot of these were, when you're in the Civil War, these are elected. The men who you're with, if you're with 100 men, they're the ones that promote you. They're the ones that vote to say, okay, we want Maxwell to be our sergeant, or we want Maxwell to be our lieutenant. And a commission would have to go through the colonel, but it would be voted on by the men as well. Their first action, which is interesting, and that's what you're going to find out about these guys and about Maxwell. And these men here in this board, these 5 veterans, these are all Roundheads as well. Now these men are Grove City men and Pine Township men. They're all these photographs were taken here in Grove City. The ribbon in the middle there shows a veterans gathering here in Grove City in 1884. So that's apparently when a lot of these photographs were taken. But these were all comrades of General Maxwell. Maxwell was the head of the organization at that time. But we'll get to that as we get through the war here. The regiment was first sent to South Carolina, which at the time, I mean, the war is just getting started. Fort Sumter's been fired upon, and what they're trying to do is to blockade the South, and they want to get a fueling station for our ships somewhere south of Charleston. So they had a landing of troops, which the 100th PA was one of them. There was a couple, one division and a couple brigades. They landed with almost like a D-Day invasion, where they would land with boats off the ships, go to the beaches, land, and they took over Beaufort, South Carolina, and that's where they were stationed right off the bat. They were down there in '61 and through the winter of '61 and into '62. They fought their first battle down there at Secessionville, where General Maxwell's brother George was wounded, and later on, after they fought at Secessionville, they were moved north. It was after the battle of First Bull Run, when of course the Union lost that and had to fall back into Washington, so things weren't going so well in the east. They brought the troops back, and they fought at the second battle of Bull Run, or second battle of Manassas. And then also in '62 they fought at Chantilly, which is outside of Fredericksburg, where just about every officer was wounded in the Roundheads. Maxwell was wounded in the neck at that battle. And in '62 in September, the Roundheads fought at Antietam, and they have a monument there at Antietam. It's above the Sherfrey farm. They crossed they didn't storm the Burnside Bridge, but that was the bridge they crossed during the battle. And they formed and they went in, headed up towards the Sharpsburg, the town, across those hills from where the bridge is at. And that's where their monuments is placed at this time. Maxwell, after Sharpsburg, he's absent from the regiment. He's placed in position, or not in charge, of the ambulance corps for the 1st Division of the Army of the Potomac for several months. That's his new position. And he doesn't return to the regiment until April of 1863. So he did miss out on the Battle of Fredericksburg, which the Roundheads were at Fredericksburg, but they were not thrown against the Marie's Heights or against the stone wall at Fredericksburg. They were kind of held in reserves. If Burnside would have got his way on the last day, he was going to lead this next attack himself, and the Roundheads were scheduled to go with him. But luckily, he was talked out of it, so the Roundheads never had to make the attack against Marie's Heights. But they were on the field at that time. They would have been cover the retreat as the Army crossed back over the river. So they're assigned in the 9th Corps. The 9th Corps is General Burnside's corps. And these guys love General Burnside. I mean, you can say what you know, I don't know if you study Civil War history, Burnside's not really looked upon as a great general, but he is well liked by his men who fought under him. And the Roundheads were one of them. And after the Battle of Fredericksburg, which Burnside was demoted, or the army was taken away from him, but he was still in charge of the 9th Corps, they send the 9th Corps west. So now they've been in South Carolina, they've been in Virginia, fighting in Virginia through December of '62. Now we're coming into 1863, and they're sent to the Western Theater. Now that entails getting on riverboats, marching, and everything else, and they're assigned to General Grant's army in the West when Grant is trying to take Vicksburg in 1863. And they fight with Grant out west, and they do have a monument out there at Vicksburg. It's a Pennsylvania monument, which they're designated on it as well. And after the surrender of Vicksburg, which was the same week or the same day as Gettysburg was being fought, Vicksburg was being fought, July 3rd and 4th, 1863. The Roundheads now are the 9th Corps, with the 9th Corps, told to come back to Knoxville. They fall back into Knoxville and told to defend Knoxville, Tennessee against Confederate invasion by General Longstreet, who had fought at Gettysburg. And they fought the Battle of Fort Sanders there at Knoxville. And they lost a few men at Knoxville. So now we're into their third year. They enlisted for 3 years. 61, their enlistment's coming up by the end of 63, and they all re-enlist as veteran volunteers. And as veteran volunteers, they are entitled to come back home, and they can regroup and recruit new men to go back with them. Of course, they've lost quite a few, and which they did. They did stop at Camp Nelson, which is outside of Lexington, which has just been designated as a national park site just this past year. And it was a depot for supplies and everything for the Western armies. And the Roundheads were there for a while, getting re-equipped, and then they made their way back home to Western Pennsylvania just in time. Now we're getting into 1864, and just in time for General Grant's campaign, when he crosses the Rapidan, and the fighting really starts in May of 1864. And this is the big push towards ending the war. And they're right with it today. Maxwell and the regiment fight at the Battle of the Wilderness in May of 1864. He does get hurt. He hurts his right leg during that battle. He's not wounded. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but he is hospitalized, and he misses the next big battle. When you look at the 1864 campaign, it's just one solid battle. I mean, it starts in May, and they don't stop fighting until they get all the way down into Petersburg and Richmond. So it's really horrendous slaughter pens at that time. But he did miss the slaughter pen of Spotsylvania, which was a very bad battle, which the Roundheads lost quite a few men in. But he catches back up with the regiment for the Battle of Cold Harbor in June of 1864. And by this time, he is promoted to captain of Company E, and the regiment's taken all kind of casualties. They're losing their officers quite a bit. And Maxwell is promoted to major in November of 1864. He becomes a major, and in fact, that's a major's uniform that he's wearing there in his photograph. He in 1864 also, now they've crossed the James River and they're down around Petersburg, which is the town just south of Richmond. Grant is sieging Richmond. He's just going around and continuing his siege. And they are involved in probably one of the most unique battles of the war. It's called the Battle of the Crater. And what had happened, that the defensive lines around Petersburg, they get pretty close together. They get within 100, 150 yards apart. And this Pennsylvania regiment, not the Roundheads, but the Pennsylvania regiment, I'm not sure the number, if it was the 151st or the 51st, was made up of a lot of miners. And they decided, well, we could dig a mine from our side under the hill and get right underneath the Confederate works. They're pack it full of black powder and explode it. And when they explode it, then we make our charge, and then we'll break the Confederate line. At this time, in '64, there were probably, in the neighborhood of about 154,000 black troops that had been recruited and fighting in the Army of the Potomac. And the idea for this particular attack under Burnside was to train these black troops for the initial charge, for the initial breakthrough. And so they did. And these guys trained well. They trained with what they were supposed to do, where they were supposed to react. They would carry ladders and things to get out of the crater, and they were training on how to go around it. And well, at the last minute, the higher ups, not Burnside, but even higher than him, decided it wasn't a good idea, since they didn't know how this was going to be, to send in the black troops to maybe, if it didn't go well, it would be looked upon being slaughtered, and it would be bad, publicity in that we sent them in instead of us. So the Roundheads are picked as the attacking force to go in first. It's pretty chaotic when it does explode. It does cause a gap in the line, but again, the guys who had trained for the attack weren't the ones that led it. And so these guys are kind of all knew what exactly they were supposed to do. They move in. A lot of them end up in the crater. Then as the Confederates regroup from the shock, they're just kind of like they're caught down in this big hole. And Maxwell again is wounded in the neck. General Leisure's son is killed. He was another officer. They lose all kind of officers at that time, and the attack fails. It's a big blunder. Burnside he's kind of the whipping boy for it. But I think if you think about it, if it would have been done correctly, it probably might have succeeded, but it didn't. So that put an end pretty much to the activity in 1864. They're still in the trenches. The war is starting to look like World War I, where everybody's in trenches and looking at each other. And 1865 comes around, and of course it's not, Confederates aren't doing well. They're slowly being strangled. No supplies getting in. They can't break the Union siege. In fact, the Union siege is just getting bigger and bigger, with Grant bringing in more troops. So General Lee decides to make one last effort to break the siege. And it's going to be a night attack in March of 1865. The Confederate troops are to be marked with cloth on their arms so that at night you can tell who's who, I guess, a little bit. They are to take the pickets out first and then attack one of the forts on the Petersburg line. Well, that particular fort was the fort where the Roundheads were. They weren't stationed in the fort, but they were in the trenches that came up alongside the fort. And it succeeded. I mean, the Confederates took over Fort Stedman, pushed the Union troops out of Fort Stedman, broke the Union line at that point. And it was General Maxwell, he wasn't General then, Major Maxwell, because the colonel of the Roundheads had been killed. Major Maxwell, on his own initiative, organizes a counterattack using not only the Roundheads but other troops in the area, and they successfully retake Fort Stedman and drive the Confederates out and can capture them. And that's where he wins his Brigadier General's star and his commission as Colonel of the Roundheads. So he is the last official commander of the 100th Pennsylvania Roundhead Regiment, which again is a very famous regiment. This was the last action of the war for the regiment, apart from small skirmishes. Maxwell was promoted to the colonel, followed in April 1865, and so the young volunteer, now a war bronze veteran, was commander of one of the most famous regiments of the United States service for gallant and conspicuous service in the Battle of Fort Stedman. He was brevetted a brigadier general, but he preferred to be known simply as the colonel for the Roundheads. So this was all new to me. I had never heard of this guy before. And as far as I knew, anybody in Grove City that I knew hadn't heard of him either. He was history that was lost, and Civil War history that I enjoyed. It was lost to all of us. So when we started our Civil War group here in Mercer, we decided to honor General Maxwell, and we put together a rededication of his. He's buried in Woodland Cemetery, and we purchased a new stone that commemorates all of everything he did in his life. We'll get into that later. He moved back here to Grove City in 1866, a year after the war's over. He gets into business, mercantile business, for over 12 years here in Grove City. He is elected Mayor Burgess of Grove City twice, and then he takes position as the commander of the Soldiers and Sailors Home in Erie. And he runs that home for quite a few years till basically he retires and moves back here to Grove City. So we wanted to do a dedication and memorial because he died in 29 at the age of 95. None of his comrades were still alive, so he was pretty much, even though he was front page news. This is a picture of him in the Grove City paper in 1928. This was a year before he died. This was Memorial Day 1928, and they're talking about his. There was 4 other men that were fought in the Civil War that were still alive in 28. So their numbers were rapidly declining. But that was the thing. When Maxwell came back, the veterans of the Civil War started a veterans organization known as the Grand Army of the Republic. And pretty much every town had their own post. And this is the ribbon for Grove City's post. This is Marion Craig Post here in Grove City. And this was their Grand Army of the Republic badge or medal that they would wear. You'll see the one picture of Kennedy in the middle. He's got his on his coat. But most of these men, they all wore these lapel pins. You'll see them here. If they're not wearing their medals, they have these lapel pins, which is their designation. And the Grand Army of the Republic was the powerhouse of the government for well into the 20th century. They elected probably at least, I think, 4 or 5 presidents, starting with Grant, and then you had McKinley and Garfield, and all these guys are all Civil War veterans. You needed their support to become the president. This was your beginning of your veterans organizations. They saw to it, and it was integrated. It didn't matter black or white. If you were a honorably discharged Union or soldier or sailor, you were in the Grand Army of the Republic, and they saw to it that you got your pension. That if something happened to you, your wife got your pension. Your widow, they took care of the guys' widows or their orphans. And like I say, Grove City had theirs here in Grove City as well. In fact, this paper here, this is original paper, Grove City paper, from 1883 on Memorial Day. And it has on it, of course, on the inside it has all these different companies here in town as well. You'll see them here that advertise. But now we have a photograph of Grove City that was taken in 1883 or 84. 83. I think it shows the dirt, Broad Street going back. I mean,
It's up on we have it upstairs in the hall. Yeah.
Okay, well that was the year this paper was printed. And what's interesting when you read this paper is the seriousness with which people took Memorial Day. And it was because, I'm sure it's because of these guys. But I can just briefly kind of talk about it. This is the program that's in here when you read this. And what I want to do, I want to give this to the Historical Society as well. If we can get a good way to preserve. You have a Mylar. If not, I can do that too.
No.
But if you have that, yeah, you can. But we'll give that to the Historical Society. But the program for the Memorial Day, this is May 30th, 1883. The order of procession. The following program will be observed. The borough schools will form on Academy Street with the right on Main Street in charge of teachers. Second, the students of the academy will form along with their professors. So we're talking about Grove City College and all the schools. All the citizens in attendance will form on academy grounds in charge of an aide. The several societies will take their place in the following order on Broad Street, right on Pine Street. That's the Oddfellows. What is some here I don't recognize? Union Workers, I see that, EAU and the RT and T. I'm not sure which organization that was. But those 4 fraternal groups. Ministers of the gospel, editors with the Burgess and the town council will form on Broad Street near the GAR post headquarters, led by Greenville Independent Band, which I thought was interesting that they brought the Greenville Independent Band down here. Of course, when you look at the picture of what Grove City was like, it wasn't really very big. The Committee on Decorations and Glee Clubs were next in line. Then orphans from Soldiers Orphans School in Mercer were brought here. Then Marion Craig Post, number 325, Grand Army of the Republic, and all visiting comrades and old soldiers and sons of veterans will be in line. Each column will form at points designated and be ready to move promptly at 10 a.m. or at the command of the Chief of Division. When the column moves from the post headquarters, which was somewhere on Broad Street, I wasn't sure exactly where, they don't really give an address on it or anything. The band will be placed at the head of the procession when the entire column will move to the cemetery, which would be Woodland, where the dedication of The headstones and decoration services will be held, after which the column will move out with Greenville Band and Glee Club in front, followed by soldiers, orphans, GAR post, old soldiers, and go to the Methodist Church Cemetery. And it says the borough schools, the students of the academy, citizens will follow, and the disbanded on the Academy Street. Prompt action in perfect order is requested during the solemn service. And after they were done out there, the afternoon exercise in the park will begin promptly at 1:30. And all merchants and citizens are requested to decorate their places of business and residences and suspend business from 10 a.m. to 12 and from 1:30 to 3 and participate in the exercise. So everybody was supposed to go out.
And who is watching the parade?
So I thought that was it. And again, that's all. I just kind of jotted that down from the paper here, so you can read that yourselves. And it gives a list of the post commander, which is Maxwell, and then all his vice commanders and stuff. So now, in 1996, we rededicated General Maxwell's headstone, and we had a ceremony up here, and we had quite a few in attendance, as far as the town mayor. I think Howard was our representative at that time, and I invited the man who wrote this book, Bill Gavin. This is the history of the 100th Pennsylvania Rounders. Now, when he came, we also gave a copy of this to the Grove City Library, so they should have a copy of it back still. But this book here, right now, valued about $150. So there are not many of them out there. But Bill Gavin was a World War II veteran, a graduate of West Point, and I wrote him a letter, and I said, would you be willing to come and speak at our dedication ceremony? And he wrote back and he said, well, he had his be at West Point for one of the anniversary things, reunions, but he'd be glad to come to Grove City. And he knew right where General Maxwell's grave was. And so we were tickled to have him. And this is a picture of him speaking at the dedication ceremony. But I always found it interesting what he said about the general. The following are some excerpts from a speech given by a noted historian, William Gavin, who was the author of the regimental history of the 100th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. And he goes as quotes as follows. Of all the soldiers in the 100th Pennsylvania, and there were over 2,000, only 12% survived. Out of all the people in the 100th PA, Colonel Maxwell is my personal hero, and that is out of 2,000 men. Colonel Maxwell was a real soldier's soldier. Wounded at the unfinished railroad cut at the 2nd Manassas in 1862, wounded at the crater at Petersburg in 1864. Due to casualties, Maxwell was promoted through the ranks, a real soldier through and through. The other regimental commander was Dawson, born in New Wilmington. All the sacrifices the men made in 47 months, Spotsylvania, Virginia, 140 men lost, graves of boys in the 100th. Original trenches are still there at Spotsylvania, 10 to 12 graves. Maxwell's brother-in-law, Private Campbell, is buried there. Colonel Maxwell at his best, March 1865. Lee's final assault on Fort Stedman. He rallied 6 or 7 companies at Fort Haskell. Maxwell got the men together and organized the counterattack toward Fort Stedman. General Hartranft's troops were way in the background, he said. Confederate flags were captured. Charlie Oliver, John Johnson, and Chambers received the Medal of Honor for their captured flags. Maxwell should have got the Medal of Honor because he organized the counterattack. General Hartranft was told by Maxwell not to fire into the fort as the Roundheads had already retaken it. As regiment historian for the 100th PA, I have a great admiration for him. So that was, I thought that was really what he said. And I was thinking, when they recaptured Fort Stedman, when Maxwell led his men back over the ramparts back into the fort, the two men who followed him both got Medal of Honors. Maxwell got his star, which was his reward for that. After we did General Maxwell rededication, we started on some other. Our Civil War heritage really started popping out in Mercer County, and we did a dedication for Lewis Brest. Now, Lewis Brest, he was from Mercer County, and he fought with the 57th Pennsylvania. He's buried in Mercer's Citizens Cemetery, and he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his combat down at in Virginia, the Battle of Sailor's Creek. In hand-to-hand combat, he had taken the enemy's flag, captured it. Now he died in 1950, at the age of 73. He died in Mercer. He's buried in Citizens Cemetery. He had like 50-something cents in his pocket when he died. The medals back then weren't what they are today as far as what they were thought. They were just starting. It was something new, but it was still something that the men were proud of. And he was buried in the Grand Army of the Republic section there at Mercer, but he didn't have any recognition. He just had a regular headstone that the GAR post had given him with his name on it, his date of birth and date of death, but no recognition as to his award. So we wrote for his records at Washington Archives, and one thing you find out is a lot of these Medal of Honors during the Civil War were taken away from the men because they had to be approved. They were giving them out quite a bit at first, and if you didn't do something heroic or gallant, then they said, well, I mean, if a guy just picked the flag up after a battle and said, here's the Confederate flag, which they could do at Pickett's Charge. There's several laying there in front of the Union troops, but they weren't captured in battle. They were just picked up off the ground. His had to be approved, and his record showed that his Medal of Honor had been approved by Secretary Stanton, who was the Secretary of War under Lincoln. So we had records, signed records in his archives that he had been awarded the Medal of Honor. So we applied for a Medal of Honor headstone, and we were it was approved, and they came and issued it. It has a registration number on it, so anybody can't just be buried with a Medal of Honor headstone. It has to be approved and registered with the Medal of Honor Society. So, and then also, he's also in the Soldiers and Sailors in Pittsburgh, and the Wall of Honor, and he's in the Medal of Honor Museum down in Charleston, South Carolina as well, his information. So that was another piece of lost Mercer County history that we got and found out about.
Was he buried with his?
No, his medal. Like I say, when he died, the record is the obituary said like 50-something cents in his pocket. He died with his daughter. We know where his medal was at for a while. Because when we did the dedication, the Brest family came from Scotland to attend the dedication. Now, when we did Maxwell's dedication, they came from Oregon. Plus, we had a lot of locals still, because General's daughter married Welch. Welch is a family still here in Western Pennsylvania. Some are still in Franklin, and but we did have some family members come from Oregon and California to attend Maxwell's dedication ceremony. Breast, they came from Scotland. We held it in Mercer, and we heard about his medal. It was in the hands of it was in the hands of an adopted child, something, in Vegas. And he was attempting to sell it at that time. And one of the family members had told us wrote us a letter. And, well, you're not allowed to sell them. You're not allowed to sell Medal of Honors. You're not allowed to, your family can keep them. They can donate them to historical society or museums or whatever. But you can't trade in them, and you can't purchase them. So I don't think it ever did go to sell, because we wrote letters to him, we explained that to him, but we never heard back from him. But at that point, she had sent us a photograph. She was holding it. But it's still out there, we think. We don't know where, but maybe someday it'll make it back to Mercer County. We don't know. But so after we did the two dedications, we come up to the bicentennial of Grove City. And we decide, well, we're going to do in honor of General Maxwell. We'll bring the Civil War to Grove City, to Memorial Park, and this was in 1998 that we did. That we first came in with our Civil War group out of the County Historical Society, and it was a big hit. They want us to do it every year, but we said, well, every other year would be better, because do it every year, I think everybody kind of gets tired of it or whatever. But every other year, it's worked out real well. We just been 20 years last year, and we're scheduled again for next year. And I think last year was one of our biggest ones. We probably had about 130 troops with the full artillery as well. And what was interesting is this is not the first time Civil War reenactment was done here in Grove City. This was found from the Grove City Reporter Herald, and it's dated July 4th, 1890. So now, 1890, you still got it, the veterans are still here. The Marion Craig Post, and this is right out of the paper, the Marion Craig Post of the Grand Army of the Republic, located here in Grove City, made up of combat veterans of famous battlefields of the Civil War, such as Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Gettysburg, came together with local men of Company F of the 15th Infantry Regiment of the Pennsylvania National Guard and the cadets of the Grove City College to create a battle reenactment for the fine citizens of the community. A 4th of July celebration that people would remember all their lives. The National Guard soldiers would place their muzzle-loading cannons on the hills overlooking the college field in the middle of Grove City. So they had cannons too, see? The contingent of Grove City cadets, 2 companies strong, would form up along Main Street, facing north, splendid in their cadet uniforms and equipped with surplus muzzle-loading muskets and accoutrements. On their right, along the banks of Wolf Creek, local men of Company F, Pennsylvania National Guard, formed up fully armed with 45-70 rifles loaded with blank cartridges. These men of the 15th Regiment, well drilled and representing the new modern U.S. Army, marched in support of the college cadets. Then, to the thrill of the crowd gathered and the last to arrive on the field, came the veterans of 1861. Posted near the rear of the Methodist Church and marching up past the line of 3 artillery pieces and presenting a battle line against the other 2 units already on the college field, came the old veterans in blue. To the delight of the crowd gathered to celebrate Independence Day, the muzzle-loading cannons opened fire along with musket fire of the Civil War veterans and other units on the field. As the cadets and Company F men advanced against the artillery and the GAR veterans of battle reenactments took place to the delight of everyone. Soon smoke from the guns obscured the field as the sounds of a Civil War battle was heard in Grove City. 1890. So as we take part, and this is, I wrote this, as we take part in Camp Maxwell, remember that we're carrying on a tradition that is started by the Civil War veterans themselves right here in Grove City. So the last thing what we've done as far as honor all the men from let me see if I can find it here. Yeah. Is up at the monument. Every time I go to the Civil War monument in Mercer, growing up, there was no information. You know, it said to the boys of 1861, 1865. And unless you really went and researched, with probably at the time I didn't, like, well, who were they? So what we did is we purchased and had made the bronze plaque that was placed at the monument. So now that whenever visitors to the monument, which the monument is really spectacular. The monument, it's over 100 years old. I think it was dedicated in 1894 or thereabouts, in the 1890s. And the price of that monument was the price of somebody's house at the time. So it was a valuable monument. And what the plaque has, it has the 2,500 men and boys from Mercer County who served in the War of the Rebellion, and all the different regiments that the men were in and their companies that they served in. So that's up there at the monument now, so that the researchers can go there and start their research at that point. But this is also a picture of General Maxwell in his later years here in Grove City. Again, if you haven't seen his grave up at the Woodland, it's a visit. We did put his image on his headstone, that engraving from that.
He was part of our cemetery walk last.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we did a walk through Woodland.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
He was one of our highlights.
Yeah. See, he still has one of his great grandsons still comes and visits. He was here this past summer. Well, no, this past winter he stopped in. He lives up in Oregon, but he was at the dedication too at that time in '96. So, if there are any questions.
Is this monument near the courthouse, or is it further east?
The monument is right in front of the courthouse, right?
Okay.
Yeah. It'd be right on the east side of the courthouse. Now, like I say, we have a beautiful monument. Now, that monument here in Memorial Park, what we want to do, it needs cleaned. It needs sealed between that stone. Now, when you read the history of that monument was initially intended to go downtown here. If you remember back years ago, there was the wall of the sign of the names right down there by the Methodist Church, down on that corner of Pine and Broad Street. There was a sign there with names. Actually, it's part of the ones out there now at the park. They moved it out there, but that's where it was intended to go, and it was all paid by citizens of Grove City. That's how they collected the money. Well, they got so much money that the monument they wanted to spend it all on the monument. The monument was too big to put down there on Pine. So they just, at the time, that wasn't Memorial Park, that was Grove City Park. It was a different name. So they changed the name of the park to Memorial Park, and then they put the monument up there on the hill. And like I say, it's a beautiful monument. We do a ceremony every Camp Maxwell right up at the monument. But it does need some work. It needs resealed between the stones. And it starts out in the back, I think, I'm not sure if it starts with the Revolution. I think it starts with the Revolutionary War in 1812 and then Civil War. Now the monument's dated 1925 when it was dedicated. Maxwell was still alive. He had 4 years yet to live, so it's a good possibility that Maxwell was at the dedication of that monument. I can't find any records of that Memorial Day, or when they dedicated that one. I've come up to 1924, and the Reporter Herald or paper, it was lost in a fire or whatever. We don't have any records of 1925. But in 1924, there mentioned two things. That they were waiting on the Eagle. The Eagle was being cast in New York, and they said that General Pershing was going to be at the dedication of the monument. Now Pershing retired in 24, so it's a good chance Pershing could have been here. And what I want to check with is the Carlisle War Barracks to see if the Guard has any records of that. But if that was the case, I would say it was probably dedicated on Veterans Day, not Memorial Day, because Veterans Day was Pershing's Day. That was the end of World War I, 11/11/11, and I kind of figured, well, if I'm going to find that dedication ceremony and who was there, but there should have been a big write-up in the paper about it, because it's an expensive monument, and it's a big monument, but so that's our kind of another project we're working on. That'll be 100 years old here in about the next 5 years. So it'll be something to rededicate. And
how do you get your funding for these projects that you do?
we did what I did. General Maxwell was a charter member of Grove City Masonic Lodge. And so at the time I gave talks to the different lodges around the district, and they donated. And I gave other talks, I can't remember to who, other civic organizations. Everybody donated towards the headstone. Headstone we got out over at Harrisville. They ordered it for us and everything. And the same thing with the plaque. Plaque came out of West Virginia. But the headstone for Brest, which was the Medal of Honor, that was VA. That was supplied by them. We didn't have to pay for that. And since then, our organization, we've done another one. We did another dedication. Well, if the headstone is bad, Colonel Sheets at the VA, he's a big contributor to this. He'll replace it. But I would think it's been 5 or 6 years ago, we had a broken headstone for a Civil War veteran and Mercer citizen, and it was to Robert Reed. And Robert Reed was a black soldier. He was a 55th Massachusetts. And he was a freeman. They were all freemen from Mercer, him and his brother. There was 2 other brothers. And at that time, Pennsylvania wasn't, they went to Pittsburgh to enlist, but Pennsylvania wasn't accepting any black troops or any black men. So they went to Massachusetts, and that's where the 54th Mass Glory, the movie Glory, that's where that movie came about. Well, they were recruiting black troops. So these 3 brothers from Mercer, who were freemen, they weren't escaped slaves. Their family had been free and had been living in Mercer for years. Enlisted in the 55th Massachusetts, and he fought in the South. And when you consider that, there's a guy he doesn't have to go and fight. They're not requiring him to go fight. He's free, but if they'd have captured him down there, he'd have been either executed or put in slavery. So he was putting everything on the line to go and fight for that. So his headstone was broke, so we ordered a new headstone, and we did a ceremony there, and it worked out real nice. It was a nice ceremony. So that's one thing we do. If a family has a Civil War veteran and maybe they themselves have acquired a new headstone, if you let you let this historical society know, or the county, and they contact us, and we're doing, I think for Memorial Day this year, May 30th, we have one up in Erie that we'll be dedicating. And that brings us around to the Sons of Union Veterans. That's what this is on my hat. The Grand Army of the Republic was, as strong as it was and as big as it was a dying organization, because as they died off, it was done. and they had property everywhere. I mean, soldiers and sailors, the big down Pittsburgh. And so what happens as they're aging, their sons want to get involved and help them out. And they agree. They start a Sons of Union Veterans, which started in Pittsburgh. The first camp of Sons of Union Veterans was in Pittsburgh, camp number 1. And by act of Congress, all their property was turned over at the death of the last Grand Army of the Republic to the Sons of Union Veterans. So we are a heritage organization. The members trace their lineage back to a Civil War Union soldier or sailor. And ours is the Isaac Eaton Camp, number 504. We meet once a month up at the Mercer County Historical Society. The organization is national. I mean, it's a national organization. And you don't have to be an actual son. If you're interested, you can join as an associate. But it's kind of a way, like I said, I joined it back in '72, but my interest when I was 20 was more into reenacting and getting out there and camping and everything else. But as the older I get, I'm kind of being drawn to the sun because it's a lot. The guys are a lot more my age now, and they have their organizational meetings throughout the state and everything. But it's again, our charters are almost written exactly like the Grand Army of the Republic. May 30th is the day that we have to do something to dedicate or memorialize Civil War veterans. And so this year, every year on May 30th, and it's fallen on, I think, on a Wednesday this year or Thursday, but we have a ceremony up in Erie Cemetery for one of the new headstones being placed. So, again, I guess if there's any questions, I don't even know how long I went.
Tim will be around. If anybody has any questions, come up and
I just want to comment a couple documents that the Historical Society has here. We have the diaries of R.C. Craig.
Okay.
For
Craig.
every day that he was in for about 2 years, and it's been transcribed.
Good.
We have that
I'd like to
here.
see this.
Yeah, they're up in
And,
our veterans room.
We have, sure what you call it, the mustering in or out
Right.
for, it was done in Newcastle, but Mr. Gilmore had given it to the society.
Okay.
It has all the names of the people that were left the military at that time.
Right.
So that's some documents that we have. And there's one other document that actually my brother did, was about our relative that was a substitute in the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother wrote a whole story about his time in the battles, and part of that he incorporated the diary from somebody that was actually there, so he could make the story real.
Right.
And that,
Right.
and that story is here.
Well, that's good. Very good. That R.C. Craig is in this. He's listed as the main guy, presentation or something in that Memorial Day 1883.
Oh, is that
Yeah, his name's down there in that list. Yeah.
How many of the battlefield sites have you gone around?
I'm in a
to?
meeting. I'll call you back later.
Oh man,
lot
they're
of-
everywhere. Yeah, no, there's lots of them around.
Yeah, we were coming back up from Florida this January of this year, and was cutting cross country in South Carolina, and we accidentally stumbled on Andersonville,
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
The
Georgia.
Chris-
That's
or
Georgia.
Georgia.
Yeah.
Georgia.
That
Yes.
was really something. I mean, it just
Yeah.
brought tears to
Right.
my face.
No, it is. When you see a cemetery of over 13,000 men
Yes,
who died on 26 acres,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, that's impressive. It's moving. Isaac Gilkirk out here. He has on his headstone, he survived 9 months at Andersonville.
Wow.
Woodland.
It's part of our cemetery.
Right, right. And I talked to one of his great grandsons, and he said he when he was alive, this is the story the family passed down. If his kids complained about the food, he'd knock them off their seat. But he has on his headstone in stone that I survived 9 months at Andersonville prison.
It's just amazing to me that
Anybody.
anybody that
Right.
survived lived to their 70s and 90s.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
On my personal note, we were in Antietam, 8 years ago, my sister Sally and I. Now I want to go back and I want to find the hundreds of Pennsylvania infantry monuments. That's going to be my the trip in the future here. Yeah.
It's well, that's where it's at. When you go to the bridge, you go out of
Yeah,
there.
we saw the bridge.
Yeah, we saw the bridge, so we
And
know.
they're dressed. It's kind of unique. They're kind of stripped down. He's got his vest on and their hat and their accoutrements and stuff, but they're not with their coats and everything. So it must have been they had more of a. They were. I mean, the whole regiment went up, but they must have been fighting as skirmishers and stuff up through there. But yeah, it's right. It's a beautiful monument.
Gary's brought in.
Yeah.
This
That's
is,
great.
this is
Yeah.
in our library, and there's 6 of these out there. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, there's different versions, so you can read the
It's
whole 2 years long in this. So it's in the library. Anybody wants to come in and read it. This is great.
Very good.
Right here.
Yeah, like I said, he is mentioned in this dedication ceremony in 1883. So he was a distinguished.
We had some college students came down. We had the diary, and we don't want anybody to handle it. And they came down and
Did that. That's great. That's great. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Well, help yourself to refreshments. Tim, I'm sure will be glad to talk with anybody that has any questions. If any of you that have never been to the our historical society museum here, there's many of our volunteers around. Would be happy to give you a brief tour of the building. We have 3 floors of artifacts that you might want to take a look at before you leave. And thank you so much for coming, and keep us in mind in 2 weeks then.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Hey, I didn't know you at all, and I thought it was really unusual. Civil War.
Very good.
All right, thank
Good
you
to
for
see you.
coming.
I don't remember names anymore. Do you want the whole, all of them? Did you bring all that? I didn't bring
Okay.
anything.
Glad you're here.
Yeah.
I know.
Thank you, that was very interesting. I love to hear about it. In fact, we're headed to Gettysburg.
The bucket and brush for
That's great. I know.
Oh, yeah, and they have the brain is like gold, you know.
Right.
It goes in the fall and does between.
The adopted position.
Yeah, right by Chambers, right, Johnson Chambers.
The 10th Pennsylvania Reserve, they built that wall that's right there.
Yeah, I know where that
Yeah, between the
We
19th.
go every year to West. And you can come on in.
Okay, so later.
Thank you so much.
So I can use that.
Yeah, let's do this with you.
Well, and let me get into this.
Giving it to propane.